Welcome to She Blaze, where we're bringing you cannabis culture from a woman's point of view. And as always, here to elevate the cannabis industry. I'm one of your hosts, Ice Dawson, Cannabis Socialite.
And I am Dasheeda Dawson, the WeedHead.
On today's episode of She Blaze, we're following up on Texas hemp. The FDA is looking to hire cannabis companies to analyze CBD. And we discuss presidential candidates' stance on cannabis.
Okay, we are about to have a fantastic episode, and I'm just excited to be here. It's another week. It's always something fabulous happening in the cannabis space, but now we are entering into this race, right? We got 80 days or less until we have to elect a new administration, and I am eager to jump into conversation. But of course, I have to start things off with the high of the week. I'm gonna go ahead and give my high of the week, Ice. Okay.
Okay.
My high of the week actually comes out of my office, and I don't talk a lot about the work that we've been doing, but there have been some media, stories around it. So the Social Equity and Educational Development Initiatives, or SEED initiatives, we released our 2020 SEED grant recipient. We announced those recipients, and I'm very excited. There were 6 of them, and this year we were able to give away about $550,000, and that just gets me excited because it was one of the first things that I did in the office for the city of Portland. It was a real run up the hill, a lot of learning on the job very quickly on how you encumber grants and do grant making within a government context. Although I have applied to quite a few and definitely participated in RFPs to actually build my own and participate in the process of building my own, and also give out grants is something really fulfilling as part of the mission that I've had for a long time in cannabis. So that is my high of the week, giving out $550,000 from cannabis tax revenue made on.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
That is the big things popping for sure. And it's really reinvesting into your community. So it's a good job. You definitely deserve a pat on the back. You and your team over there in Portland holding it down.
We're trying. I mean, it was definitely a lot of work, but now is the time for those organizations to get to work, and I'm excited to see what they do. This is the type of reinvestment we want for all the cannabis tax revenue, not just in the city of Portland, but in the state of Oregon. And of course, we're going to talk about a little bit today, but we need it on a federal level too, right?
Okay. Definitely. The federal level is key right now to one of the reasons why I believe people should be voting based on the history. So let's jump into the first hot topic, because we got to go back down to Texas. If you remember on our season opener, season 4, episode 1, we talked about Texas banning smokable hemp via their health department. Well, they actually got a temporary restraining order that basically will not enforce that ban right now until September 2nd. And so I think that's really exciting, because ultimately it gives people opportunity to wait for a second, get their case in order, because banning smokable hemp is kind of like, what type of hemp industry are you guys really trying to have?
Yeah, I think you said it best. Is like, what kind of industry are you trying to have? And I struggle with the southern states that have such a flourishing market to begin with, and then they try to stomp it out by preventing flower from being in the market. So smokable is not also just the flower. I think it's also the vapes in this case too. And these two things alone in that market represent more than 50% of the sales. Yes, CBD gummies, CBD tinctures, all of those things are hemp-based, and they are important parts of the assortment. But fact of the matter is, everywhere where you legalize cannabis, whether it's hemp or marijuana, flower is still a good large percentage of the sales. We're talking about 40-45%. This is what we know. This is what we're comfortable with. And so it really just baffles me. And it seems only as a way to just avoid learning the truth and really educating law enforcement to say, no, you can't use the smell or flower itself. You can't use that as determinant factors to harass and or detain largely people of color, largely Black and Indigenous populations. Like, you're not going to do that. And in this case, the judge, who is a woman, by the way, right, which I think is also very interesting, is basically holding the time for these big cannabis, hemp cannabis companies to really get their ish together, right? Like, I think they plan for that to be part of the market. And if they did so, then they plan for a large part of it. Now it's like a money loss, right? If all of a sudden Texas is like, nah, you can't do it. Mind you, when we were in that last episode, didn't we also say that the Austin Police Department decided that they were no longer going to be even arresting people anyway for marijuana possession, right? So that we've got jurisdictions moving in the opposite direction. Mind you, Austin is very progressive compared to the rest of Texas. But then Texas as a whole making laws or regulatory framework to stifle the potential growth. It's sort of sad, but I'm glad that at least the judge had some wherewithal with her and basically was like, nah, we're going to hold this for a second.
Right. And I do think it's pretty cool that they got it on the docket so quickly. Sometimes these things could take months and months and months. So I'm very curious about the Texas hemp industry right now. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's move on to our hot topic number 2. This one, we are back talking about the FDA. They are actually looking for companies. During our opening, I kind of misspoke and said cannabis companies when they're actually just looking for just general companies to analyze and provide data on CBD products, whether it is cosmetic, ingestible, smokable. They're looking at all of it.
Gotcha. Well, we've been talking about the FDA's curiosity around cannabis, specifically CBD, and their interest in controlling as much as they can around that conversation. So this is just one of those opportunities. They're looking for one contractor, one company to come in and to do all of the analysis of thousands of products across many different areas, including, and I don't know if you peeped this, including areas that they're basically saying should be banned, right? So they're looking at CBD infused edibles and gummies and the like, which essentially we know that they've gone into establishments and taken off the shelves. So it's sort of interesting that they're trying to, I guess, rightfully so, they want to paint a picture of the full assortment, because let's be real, even though in some states like New York, health department has decided, okay, no more CBD in food, not allowed to do it. A lot of places still sell infused CBD products in terms of edibles. So I think they're trying to showcase the whole market, but this is an opportunity, I believe, for a cannabis testing company, right? So if you already do testing and analytics for the industry, you should submit to this RFP. We're going to leave the links, of course, for you in the comments for folks to check it out, because, we need people in there who are actually cannabis experts. I'm not interested in getting another report, which there have been many, where we have people who have no experience at all with cannabinoids or cannabinoid testing. They understand the science, I think, of just basic testing, but they don't really understand the plant. And then they go in with preconceived notions, even on the processing of it. And I think that it oftentimes leaves us with, inconsistent results, or results that you kind of got to give a little side eye, like, how did y'all, some of this don't seem right here. Yeah. So, I'm waiting to see, but I want to encourage everyone. So that's why I was like, no, this got to be a hot topic, because we want more people from the industry to actually apply here.
Well, that is true. So I'm glad I didn't speak that bad. But I think that is a great point that you make. We also have to remind people that they still have a very small time limit to give their ideas back to the FDA. based on the guidelines that they recently released back in July. So I yes, it is a draft of guidelines based on testing and analyzing cannabis research and cannabinoid research. So I definitely think people should look at the draft, give some of those ideas, and really know that when you are giving your ideas and drafting for the FDA, as many people as gives their opinion helps, but especially if you're from the cannabis industry, because a lot of them just are not really well versed in cannabis topics.
Yes. And just as a reminder, I think both of those, the due date is coming fast, August 31st. So August 31st, if you want to respond, we put the link inside the comments on the FDA contractor. And again, you're going to be contracted to basically go into the entire market and pull thousands of CBD products and look at all of the different products and basically indicate whether or not people are being accurate. Now, we know that that is actually a problem in the industry, real talk, right? And so I'm not hating that the FDA is doing it, but I want to make sure again that there's a legitimate report that comes out of it, and it's not something that we have to again look at it with a side eye like, well, I don't know. So that is the 31st, and then the comments on the initial guidelines for clinical research also due by the 31st.
So that is, we got, the time is ticking. And aren't they actually, whoever the contractor is, they have to create a report for Congress?
Yes. So basically, if you are interested, know that this is going to be a very, very important, I think, advisory role that also gets played, because you're not only doing the work, but you're also creating the report. And then you have to present that report to Congress as well. So it's just important for folks to recognize, again, this is our opportunity to have a seat at the table in the conversation. I don't know about y'all, but I have watched plenty of sessions where DEA, FDA, USDA get up and they say the craziest things about cannabis, the most erroneous and stereotypical. So it would be great to finally hear from, someone reporting that actually is knowledgeable.
I completely agree. And honestly, I think that leads us into our main topic. We did not decide to do a hot topic 3 this week, you guys, because what we have to talk about is really important. And ultimately, the presidential candidates, the president, they elect the head of these official, different bureaucracies. So I do think that we want to be smart about who we're putting in charge of them, because it does affect cannabis, especially as we try to move forward and progress in legalization on a federal level. So our main topic is all about the election right now, you guys. Yes, it is election year 2020, and we do have less than 80 days until we're voting for the chief guy in charge. So right now we have 45, and I don't want to bring it all the way back to 2016 because we know these last couple years have been roller coasters for sure, but we can at least bring it back to 2018, okay?
Okay. So
Yes.
what's the tea? What's the tea?
Well, the tea is really that even though, 45 really supports legalization, as you see my air quotes for people listening, there was never really an official plan of action. He's been through quite a bit of attorney generals, but right now in 2018, they had Jeff Sessions, who basically rescinded the Cole memo, which was passed during the Obama administration, that basically made the Justice Department hands off on states with marijuana laws and legalization medical marijuana. And they wouldn't use money to enforce that state in any shape of any way. And why I think, Dasheeda, you could definitely explain why is this so important for the DOJ to mind their business when it comes to state issues like that.
I love how you said they need to mind their beeswax. Yes. Well, because they don't know what they're doing. But no,
Okay.
the reality is when they don't mind their business, it impacts patients. And I feel the Obama administration put in place Cole Memo to protect patients. It was to protect the businesses, but protecting the businesses that are serving medical patients legally protects patients as well. And now it was also to, I think it also wound up impacting many state legalized businesses, especially Black owned ones, indigenous owned ones, Latino ones, from being targeted by the federal government as well. It's unfortunate, but it doesn't really matter how legal it has been on a state level. We still see that disproportion that's happening in our communities in terms of who gets targeted, who gets called on. And we know that that was a tactic that was being used. So Cole Memo effectively prevented that tactic from being used on medical cannabis certified licensed businesses. In 1996, when California passed medical cannabis, there was a long period of time from 96 until Obama brought this into play. And I believe it was 2011 in which he did. That period of time, there were many people who were getting raided, busted, all types of things, spent time in jail. So plenty of operators that were functioning under state law, state regulatory body that had, following all the rules and regulations, but still getting arrested federally. So that's what type of protection it is. And, we could have plenty guests come on and say, hey, that was me. And I lost this amount of millions of dollars of investment. So it does protect the businesses, but it also protects the patients, because now patients don't lose a place that they could be going to legally. When Jeff Sessions did that, remember, we were like, dang, like it was chaos. Like the cannabis was like, oh my God.
What we gonna do? Everybody going to jail.
Yep. And people were really investors were starting to freak out. So Jeff Sessions really in like 2.2 seconds reversed that, took that away. Basically, he just said we're not going to honor it. And in some ways, it's almost like the government has given us their word, and they can choose when they want to honor it or not, especially when it's not law. So that's why it's so important we have this conversation, because one, whoever is elected, their attorney general, if there's no full legalization, is really important. And when it was Jeff Sessions, we were all really kind of like, okay, very, very nervous. And the industry and as a whole, I think, held its breath. But thankfully, 45 has had a crazy administration, right? So ain't nobody staying, or they keep getting arrested.
No tea, no shade, but that's so right. He did do one thing for cannabis that I think we all can appreciate, which is in December 2018, the Hemp Farming Bill Act was signed and enacted into law. So I think that was pretty okay. It removed hemp from Schedule 1, and it made it an agricultural commodity. Now, it didn't really give states that many guardrails on how they should implement this law. But everyone, they made their own interpretation of the Hemp Farming Act. But to be fair, there has not been much movement on hemp bills or cannabis bills within the federal government right now, especially because they keep dying in the Republican-led Senate. And at this moment, we do have another attorney general, which is William Barr, who initially swore that he was just, going to take a hands-off approach. However, the DOJ is now kind of doing what we knew would happen with the Cole Memo being rescinded, using its budget to enforce the cannabis industry.
Yeah, at this point, I definitely feel like I'm not sure what to make of some of these decisions. It's almost like we're getting told opposite stories, right? On the one hand, it's like you want to relax and you think you have that support, but on the other hand, there are clear moves that are, in my opinion, they're hostile towards the current industry, and they're clearly seeming to just try to focus on how do they make money themselves before it becomes, the real law or the guidance. I mean, everybody wants to trust their government. And as a person who is now a government official, I want to say that, the intent should be there. My intent is there for me, and I can only speak for myself. But I think that's what we're looking at when we're looking at both of these platforms here on the Republican and the Democratic side, is which one which one do we feel we trust more as a cannabis industry to actually do what, we need them to do. It's just been interesting. I've been having some interesting debates, because I think that cannabis is very much bipartisan. But what you did say is everything that we've been able to do in the House to try to move the needle on supporting the cannabis industry, whether it's hemp or marijuana, the Senate has essentially killed it.
Yes. And honestly, we are seeing people make different movements within the cannabis industry. Federally, there have been a lot of cannabis companies listed on the New York Stock Exchange, and they are having a bunch of multi-state operators, and they're reviewing their merge. The DOJ is taking time to really look into that, and there was a whistleblower that basically was spilling all the tea, saying that anytime that the DOJ was looking into a cannabis company pushing together and going forward federally, basically, if Barr was not a fan, there is an investigation that is open. So he used the DOJ to his personal dislike. So I could kind of understand why you're saying these things. And we have to be clear, even though he's doing all this, there has still been no scheduling of actual THC products. Mm-hmm. And really, there's been some tough hardline guidance on hemp based on the bureaucracies. Yeah, you can't get infused CBD. You can't, right. They don't want you to have smokable CBD. So it's like, okay, do y'all only want us to make toilet paper? Like, if that's the case, you should have said that.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that we still are demonizing the flower, and so that's why we're seeing that happen in that space. It also is not to be underestimated how often flower is just used as the main reason for unwanted police interaction and ultimately arrest and incarceration. I still believe very strongly, especially now that I really understand hemp and marijuana, especially the flower cultivars on both sides of the plant, so to speak. I believe hemp flower has always been in the legacy market as Reggie's or, just again, because we don't feel the stereotypical high. I mean, obviously it's high in CBD and it has some levels of THC, but not enough for anyone to feel high. It often, that's when you feel like you're getting like not the greatest weed ever, but you probably still feel very relaxed and don't even understand why. So I think we've had them both in the legacy market for a long time. And what they're trying to do is through man-made way separate a genus and say, because this has more THC, it is somehow more demonized. And I think the flower smelling like terps, which again, not being into the understanding of the cannabis science, I think people automatically assume it's marijuana and they don't want to learn. They don't want to advance. South Carolina did the same thing. A lot of southern states are taking that stance. And I don't think if we don't have federal input, will that change?
I think you make some really great points. However, let's be clear. When you said that cannabis goes either sides, it's really the truth, because we have to look at the Democratic Party now. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris has accepted the nomination to run as president and vice president based on the Democratic Party. Mm-hmm. However, they're not perfect.
No. No, and I think that's been always what we've struggled with. I think, honestly, if I'm being frank, the person that during the Democratic, I guess, primaries that impressed me the most was actually Elizabeth Warren. In terms of what she put out as far as a cannabis platform or legalization platform. Bernie Sanders was very similar, but unfortunately, Uncle Joe has missed the mark on many different occasions talking about it. In fact, I'm scared for him to talk about it because I think it will turn off a lot of people in our industry. There are a lot of people in our industry that are pro-Trump. Like, let's be real. In cannabis, there are a lot of people who are pro-45, and their pushback has continued to be that Joe's still calling it a gateway drug, or he's still making commentary around cannabis that shows the level of ignorance. But the good thing about Joe that I will say is he seems open to the influence of Senator Kamala Harris. And I think that we can't sleep on her experience because she's coming out of California, good and bad. And so it's so important for us, again, hold her to that, that same standard. Is like, we got to talk about it because she got to pass, and it's good and bad as far as cannabis is concerned.
Yes, I know that's right. Well, you make some great points. And the Democratic Party decided they were not going to push, I'm not calling him Uncle Joe, but they're not going to push Joe Biden to really talk about cannabis or make it his focus cannabis. Though he did have a meeting with Biden, with Sanders, and basically they did release, if he was to become president, what would some of his guidelines be on cannabis. And to be fair, all he really said was, we know there's been some social injustice. We will definitely fix that. There needs to be some descheduling, definitely something we would fix. And so that was about it. And
that's it.
Right. And you're right. History speaking, he actually had he was one of the toughest people on during the war against drugs era. Yeah. It's actually scary going into his history. So I don't want to talk about him too much. However, I think, like you said, Kamala Harris has done some amazing things and not so great things. Mm-hmm. However, as far as cannabis, she has always tried to protect the patient since learning more, becoming the Attorney General of California in 2010.
Yeah, I think, sometimes it's so important. This is why we talk about getting your civic life on. And I'm very excited that we'll be able to host a panel for that. But the reality is people don't understand the dynamics that happen in government. And the more that we've worked in cannabis, to be honest, the more I've started to understand. Now, that doesn't mean that you need to compromise your morals, but I have questions, and I have really tough questions for the senator, as well as my soror. So I'm not biased even in a thinking of it. When she was part of the Democratic primary race, again, I said Elizabeth Warren was someone that I was most impressed with. I was actually not very impressed with Senator Harris's, general answers. And I think because she was really struggling with answering the question about all of the convictions she had under her belt. Because let's be real, we don't want to talk about Joe Biden because he old, right? He's definitely almost 80. Let's be real. And so he's gone through, we got scores of time, 3 scores, right? Since he turned 20, 3 scores, 20 years in chunks that he's doing different things that right now would not fly. He came from a completely different era, and we do understand that. And he has evolved. I will give him that. However, I feel hers is a little bit more truncated because it's more recent. And I think therefore people are like, yo, plus your HBCU, plus your AKA, like you putting all these Black people in jail, essentially. And one thing I will say, as a woman who has always been focused on being excellent in my role, I have been in so many places where I am the only person of color and I am the only woman. The expectation is always that, especially women of color, we are the workhorses, right? We are the individuals who come in and we get shit done, real talk. And that is usually based on a set of criteria or performance indicators. And when you're a district attorney, one of the performance indicators is your number of convictions. And so there's this part of me that's like, so kind of confused about how one does that, but at the same time recognize I've been put in precarious situations where I have to either say I'm gonna walk away from this career path or I've got to stay and kind of stick this out, but then also want to give grace to the fact that we all thought myself included, cannabis was bad. You not really, because you're close to the Gen Z and you came in an environment with mommy where she was definitely pro cannabis. And so there was no worry about that, and you didn't have the backdrop of the war on drugs. Me, money, Vita, like all day long, we had Nancy Reagan in the back talking about this your brain on drugs, and we had shooting and cops who we don't really trust either, bringing down young men and even young women on the basis of smell. We've got all that post-traumatic stuff to work through, and I think it is really hard to automatically just give up a notion that you've been ingrained in and trained on. And that was the propaganda that was actually put in place, right? And there were advertisements that basically said, if you smoke weed, you're going to turn gay, which is basically two dramatically like ridiculous things to say. But those were sanctioned ads in the 80s. So we were, trained a little bit differently. And sometimes when you come that drone, I call it the war on drugs drone, you got to get snapped out of it. And she did eventually snap out of it. I think California being one of the first states to legalize, and her going from more local jurisdiction to state level work, I think she started to recognize, one, probably it was also a fiscal recognition, right? You see that money is being lost when businesses that have paid into the taxes, paid for the state, paid into licensing fees are getting shut down. She essentially was one of the few people who were like, no, we're going to protect our businesses. And I just wish she had that same mindset about protecting the patients and protecting the citizens when she was in the DA role. There is a difference between being a DA, attorney general, and a senator. And since being a senator, to be perfectly honest, her stance has broadened. She has shown growth. I mean, Wanda James, for example, and shout out to Wanda James, is one of the toughest people on, how you are, I guess, depicting your position on cannabis. And she hosted something for Kamala Harris last year. So to me, I feel like she's kind of turned the corner and getting the right advisors. And I certainly am not going to look at her with the side eye if she says, well, I'm talking with Wanda James, right? Like that's the first African-American dispensary owner in the country. So yeah, I at least will be like, okay, well, come back to me after y'all tried it, because now I got some tough questions after that,
Right. Well, I do agree with what you're saying. I completely do understand why the war on drugs has gotten you guys so confused. Also, maybe that's why, call out culture is a thing with the Generation Z, because like there's no way you could get away with saying cannabis makes you gay. Like in today's culture, like somebody will sue you, somebody will throw a paint on your face, like there will be a really spark a huge issue. So I am glad that we have evolved from that, because that is not okay. That is pretty much unacceptable, and I couldn't even imagine going through that and growing up with that type of things. But I do think that in 2010, I was actually first becoming an adult. I voted. I voted in the next election after that, and so to see that she did learn about cannabis from a patient perspective and protecting the patients, because she did a lot to protect the patients. And as a senator, she has co-sponsored a bunch of bills that really would bring our cannabis industry forward in the way that we need it. Ultimately, she co-sponsored the Safe Banking Act. Now, if you know anything about the Safe Banking Act in cannabis, it is a cash-only business, and it is hard to do payroll. It's hard to pay your taxes. It's also hard to keep track of that on the books, because you never know what people are doing with the money. And so I believe that it did not pass the Senate, right? It died at the Senate.
As most things have, yes.
Oh, yes. So the Senate needs to be resurrected, clearly. But I do think that she has done some great things, supported the MORE Act. That is one of the most like comprehensive, but every time they do it, it gets better and better about social justice and reinvesting into the community after cannabis convictions. She supported the veterans bill on allowing veterans to receive VA benefits while working in the cannabis industry. And she also, I did not know this until I got some more information on her. She wrote a letter to Attorney sessions back when he was in that position on really asking him to stop blocking access to research. Now, that is a huge thing that we talk about all the time in the cannabis industry, because access to research has been so difficult. Access to products, I hear, is like, yeah, right, try again. And so the fact that she was willing to stand up to him and be like, yo, like, you're hurting us by doing this, lets you know that she is going to be somebody really good for the cannabis legalization, even if it's to help control the bureaucracies that regulate over cannabis.
I agree with you. I have to shout out quickly one of the comments that we've been getting from Dave Luckett, but more or less because, he's pointing out some things that, I feel are valid. She's a cop, can't trust cops. Well, I don't know if I feel that's 100% valid. Definitely, if you watch Law and Order, you know that the DAs work with the cops. Like, that's fact. But she's actually not the person that is on the ground arresting people. At the end of the day, real talk, the way this has been as a tool is weaved through, though, our system. So she has been part of that systemic racism. Do not get me wrong. But I will not put on her the experience like I had when Mo Burban decided he was going to come inside the McDonald's and harass us over a smell and then detain me. Like that's not what she did, nor what I don't think she would have been feeling very comfortable doing that in droves. There's a lot of racially biased acts that are happening on the ground. But yes, if you watch Law and Order, the cops work with the DA and they're constantly ensuring, again, what's their performance indicator? Convictions. So that's what they're doing. So I got to put that out there. But she has made, since that point, right? She hasn't been a DA in a minute. And since she's decided to keep going with her career, and she's now in more positions of power and influence, like the Senate, which, by the way, she was only the second African-American woman to be elected into the Senate. I believe the first Indian-American woman. The reality is that that's a barrier she done broke through. And in that seat since then, I have to now look at what has she done. I will say she has not done a great job explaining what it feels like to be in the DA role and forced to uphold things that maybe morally you don't agree with or you question. Although I can find old video of her talking about those issues. She's on a C-SPAN panel where she is talking about the systemic racism that exists in the criminal justice system. Someone who is a DA at the time. But yeah, I think right now her influence in the Senate has been really, really needed. But Dave Luckett put up another point in the comments, which is if we don't flip the Senate, none of that matters. That's true. Every single thing that she is bringing to the Senate and sponsoring and pushing forward, unfortunately, is getting blocked because the Senate is Republican dominated. So this is where now, even though it's bipartisan issue and it's supposed to be on both sides, that's when I question our pro-45 or pro-Trump partners, I guess, in the cannabis space, right? Where you're like, hey, well, how do you explain the pro-Republican or the primarily Republican Senate blocking all of this ability to move through? And, no one really, they all kind of give the shrug the shoulders. Nobody has an answer. So I do think that, it's important for us to hold her accountable. But when we say if she has to answer to these acts, it's like, okay, hold up. America in general got a lot of acts to answer to. And, the way we've approached that in the past has been very forgiving. And I always struggle when we're, especially people of color, Black women are more critical of other Black women. And I struggle because I see both sides of it. On the one hand, I'm like, dang, Sora, like you should know better, especially her upbringing. But at the same time, I've also been on that side of I got to be excellent. I got to deliver. And this is what I'm being asked to do in a time and a climate where I am not supported. And this isn't a Black Lives Matter movement that's going on behind as a backdrop. Not everybody is equipped to decide they're going to be the Harriet Tubman of their movement every time. And for us to expect that is out of control, in my opinion.
Absolutely. I think you make some great points, but I also think, even if the Senate is Republican again, there are things as vice president and what she can influence on the president and who they're deciding to put heads of the bureaucracies. Like I said,
Right.
heads of the FDA, head of the USPS, okay, head of there are multiple things that they could put better people ahead of, a better attorney general for sure. Like, there are just things that they can do regardless of all of that, that can make your life better in the cannabis industry.
Absolutely. And I think we have to listen. I am not asking that we go easy here because, like I said, wasn't necessarily the original first choice for me. But I do think that at this point, she makes Joe palatable for a lot of people, especially people of color, especially women. You know, the list goes on. And this is a strategy that we've seen employed before. I was talking the other day on a panel about the fact that we saw that in the presidential election, I believe for 2012, with Sarah Palin being added. It just was a really poorly executed strategy because she wasn't qualified and she kind of made it a parody. She quickly became a Saturday Night Live skit. In this case, watching the Democratic convention, which, by the way, set a precedent because it is the first ever convention that has been done virtually. And I do believe they did an excellent job in capturing so many different key moments. Listening to her speech, she dropped so many different hints that if you are part of the culture, whether it is her sorority culture, her HBCU culture, her Indian culture, her Black culture, her culture as an attorney, a government official, she was dropping all the hints to let you know, hey, I actually have been there and I've had this experience and I am not forgotten it. And now I'm in a position where I may have a lot more influence and y'all gonna have to rock with me. And sometimes that's what those subliminals are for. And it ain't for everybody, but let me believe, like, let y'all know, I heard mine. I heard my call to action. Okay.
Absolutely. And at the end of the day, now that you're in the position of power, again, you know, bring in 10 more people to the table that look different and look like you, that are your people, so I can appreciate that. And sister, I'm ready to follow. Okay. Because at the end of the day, I just have to, you have to do what you have to do. And so that, at least she knows what she's doing too. Because some of these things, some people are confused out here, honey. Confused. But this is what.
I really just wanted to say, because we got some good comments and, you know, it's always good. I know we've got to close out, but really quickly, equity is a big part of the conversation here. And I think Ice, you know, you brought it up. She was one of the biggest supporters and has been of the MORE Act, which basically is wrapped up in a bow what's happening in, or supposed to be happening in, Illinois. It has cannabis tax revenue that is being reinvested back into the communities that have been most adversely affected. But more importantly, it is written with equity in mind. Everybody knows where I stand on equity. As a citizen, I absolutely am fully in support of it. But the great news is, as a government official, I get the opportunity, like you said, when you're in positions, you get to now craft frameworks that are in operation that help to drive that equity. I don't think any government regulatory body for cannabis has ever been stood up with the thought in mind, hey, we're about to make a lot of money. We actually can start to right some of these wrongs. Or, hey, we're about to make a lot of money. There's so many communities that we pummeled when we were saying this was illegal, and now we need to fix those communities. So I just think that it's important for us to recognize that we finally have in her at least someone who has clearly been able to articulate, in the same way you or I can articulate, all of that trauma, all of that past that really can start some level of healing, start some level of equity movement with cannabis legalization done the right way. But I'm kind of with Taronda. I'm good on federal legalization, but give us a good attorney general that's going to hold up the Cole memo, pass the SAFE Act, give us the means to actually build business before super big businesses come in, and then let's talk about federal legalization.
Absolutely. I don't even think necessarily federal legalization is that big of a deal. I think we still have to go state by state. However, yes, let our industry be comfortable to do basic stuff like bank, not have the DOJ bust up in our things, maybe not have the DEA being the surveillance of protests. There's a bunch of things that you can do. But ultimately, this has been a great show. We just wanted to give you guys a little bit more perspective when voting in less than 80 days, you guys. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for delivering your questions. And always feel free to keep putting on the questions. Keep watching, and you can always find us online. But Dasheeda, tell us where they can find you.
Well, as always, I am at Dasheeda Dawson, at Dasheeda Dawson on IG, on Twitter, and you can find me here on Facebook, facebook.com/the WeedHead. So yeah, find me anytime at theweedhead.com.
Absolutely. And you can listen to She Blaze anytime on SoundCloud, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and make sure you follow us at theweedhead.com. Bye.
Ooh. Well, you need to have a great week, Ice, okay? Everybody else have a great week as well.
Okay, well, don't be telling my business on the internet.
Bye. I'll talk to you later. Bye.